We are fortunate to have Travis, he has a Portuguese last name, Vasconcelos?
Vasconcelos, like cellophane.
Vasconcelos, okay.
No test on that, don't write it down, you don't have to worry about it.
We're lucky to have him here for several reasons. We would like to publicly thank him for making this exhibit possible here, right now in this museum. All of the boat models that you see here and the tools from the Howard Steamboat are here, and they are graciously loaned to us from the Howard Steamboat Museum. Travis is the director and curator at this museum in Jeffersonville. Since boyhood, he has had a passion for steamboats and the sounds they make. Travis has spent most of his life connected with river history, and he has worked at one time or another on virtually all the steam-powered river vessels in the country, serving in a variety of capacities. So he not only talks the talk, he walks the walk, which is kind of nice. His chief interest is in calliopist, and that interest has led him to become one of the nation's authorities on their history and their operation, both in land-based and river-based instruments. For instance, he has worked for over 10 years operating and maintaining the Indiana University Calliope. He has worked as a pipe organ builder, and he serves as a riverlorian, I like that word, a riverlorian for over 15 years with the Delta Queen Steamboat Company, the Majestic America Line, and the American Queen Steamboat Company. So we are very fortunate. He's been with Howard Steamboat Museum dating back from 1978 when he became a member. So we have little membership things. We'd love for you to be a member of our museum as well. That led to volunteering. We can always use volunteers here. And he worked as an administrative assistant and worked his way up the chain. He is now the director and curator since 1920. We welcome him as he talks to us about showboats and excursion boats when entertainment came to the river and to river towns like Newburgh. Thank you, Jack.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was a wonderful,
Thank you.
wonderful introduction. Now I have to live up to it. Well, first of all, folks, welcome. And thank you for coming out today to learn a little bit about our river history. The subject we're going to talk about today is excursion boats and showboats. Now, I'm going to have pictures to go along with it up here on the screen, so I want to make sure everybody's going to be able to see that. If not, you might want to move now, because there are a few seats up here if you want to come up closer so that you can see. I am not your typical speaker, and I'm going to say this right up front. If you have a question, I will do a question and answer session at the end, but if you have a question, something comes up while I'm in the presentation, probably not going to remember it to the end, so put your hand up. I can stop and answer a question because it's going to make it easier for everybody to follow along, and perhaps the way I say something isn't the way that you might learn it. So if something doesn't make sense, stop me. I'll be glad to clear that up along the way. Well, our subject today is showboats and excursion boats when entertainment came to the river. Now, we all know that the river, well, it was the super highway of the day, and the day we're talking about is really the late 1700s up until the current day. It was a super highway as this country was growing out west. Of course, we all know about Lewis and Clark and their expedition out west. There was no highway, there was no major road, so they followed the rivers. That's how they got there. That's also how a lot of our towns were formed. A lot of people, when they come up to the Howard Steamboat Museum, will ask us questions about the steamboats, and then they'll say, oh, well, they took you to the Mississippi River, and then it was wagon trains from there. No, there were plenty of other rivers that went out west that they went. The Mississippi River drains 1/3 of the United States of America, so there's plenty of different ways to go by river should you choose to do so. So how did we do that? How did we travel by river? Well, we're going to cover that in this as well, because one kind of leads to the other. Wake up. I swear it worked a moment ago. Oh, I turned it on. Sorry. There we go. Now, the first showboat came to the river in 1831 in the form of a flatboat. Flatboats came before steamboats. They were just rough-hewn lumber made into a hull, much like a barge today, albeit much smaller, and you would load all of your cargo there. Now, what kind of cargoes would they have? Everything they needed to sustain their life on their trip: food, provisions, clothing. Then cargo. These boats would go down the Ohio, the Mississippi, the Missouri River, and end up down in New Orleans. Along the way, they would sell their wares, and then when they got there, they would walk back to wherever they started. Taking one of these boats up against the current was tantamount to impossible. There were ways to do it. You could cordel it, meaning that you took a pole and pushed it into the bank of the river. And it would take several people doing that to pull up against the current, but you'd be lucky to make 3 miles a day. That's what the average made cordelling. Also, you could put people on the bank and pull the boat up. Again, if you made 3 miles a day, you were doing pretty good. So generally what they did when they got those boats down there was they sold them. Why would anybody want a boat if it could only go down and you've gone pretty much as far as you're going to go for the wood, the lumber? They were very popular. If you've ever been down to Natchez, Mississippi, they have over 600 antebellum structures in Natchez. Over 600. Antebellum meaning, well, it's actually Latin, meaning before ante, the belligerents, bellum. That's what the phrase means, so before the Civil War. Over 600 of these buildings are made out of flatboat wood. Why? Because upriver we have oak. They have live oak down there, but it's much softer. Oak was much more durable and lasted longer. Go into the French Quarter, most of those buildings that are down there that have wood in them, that was flatboat wood. So the flatboat was very important. So how did it become part of the showboat? Well, this is a rather interesting tale. There was a young man by the name of William Chapman. He was from the same place as the founders of the Howard Steamboat, or the Howard Shipyard, Manchester, England. He, as a child, born in 1890, fell in love with the theater. He joined a traveling show, or caravan, if you will, and would go around to the different towns in his native England and produce and act in shows. Well, he heard about all the opportunities in America, so he came over here in 1830, and his family ultimately in 1831 settled in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Now, by this point, Pittsburgh was a thriving metropolis. But he started to hear about what was going on to the west, down the Ohio River, down the Mississippi River, and that was, we were still forming the towns along those rivers. So he got an idea. From that traveling caravan show, why not take a flatboat and put a theater on it and float it down the river, and everywhere he'd stop, he could produce a show, make a little bit of money, go on to the next town, so on and so forth. So he did so. Now his actors were his mother, his wife, his daughters, he had 2, and his son. And they would stop at these little towns and they produced shows until such time as people either stopped trading chickens or giving them money or whatever it took to get you in there to watch the show. And 2 years later, they got to New Orleans, Louisiana. And it's time to sell the boat. So they sold the boat so that it could be torn down and the lumber could be reused. And they walked back the Natchez Trace to the Ohio River and then followed the Ohio River. It took 6 months. They followed the river all the way back to Pittsburgh. And when they got there, they had been walking along the river for a great deal of time. So they had seen steamboats. They had seen other flatboats. And it was actually his daughter, Lydia, who said, "Daddy, why don't we build another one and we'll push it with a steamboat? That way, when we get to the end of the river, we can turn around and come back." That was a pretty smart idea, and that's exactly what the showboat became from that point on. Showboats were nothing more than a theater on a barge pushed by a paddle wheel powered towboat. Here we see the Valley Belle pushing Bryant's showboat. Now, a lot of these families would name their boats with their family name. It's very common to see this. Bryant was one of them, the Reynolds family and their boat, the Majestic. Their names meant entertainment when they came to town. So some people would wait for a specific family to get there because they knew their shows were going to be better than the other ones. And if you think there wasn't fighting amongst showboat families as to who got into town first and who got the best landing and things of this nature, well, you're wrong, because they knew. The first guy got the best business, but the guy who had the best reputation got all the business. And that's how the showboat business operated. Now, they would have an advance man. This is a person who would go ahead of the showboat several days and put up posters all over town. This advance man would go to every business in town and offer them free tickets to the show if they could put their flyer up in the window. And they would advertise some pretty exciting ideas that may or may not be exactly what happened, but it would draw you in and get you to come down to the show. So the advance man was a very important person. This person would make all sorts of deals to get that word out there, to get you excited for the showboat. But how did you know the showboat had arrived? The steam calliope, the voice of the river, the mighty infernal music machine. This is how you knew it was imminent. For these things, a rather unique invention. The calliope was invented by a man by the name of Joshua C. Stoddard of Worcester, Massachusetts. How did it get to the river? Well, when he designed this thing, he called it, when he patented it on the 5th of October, 1855, he called it the American Patented Steam Piano. What it is, you see the gentleman here with the keyboard. When he pushes the key, you can see the wires under here. That opens up a valve and steam goes through the whistle and it makes a sound. And they're arranged chromatically, although a steam calliope is one of the hardest instruments in the world to keep tuned because the steam causes a change in pitch. The heat causes expansion and contraction. So one day if you tune it at 72 and the next day it's 85, well, she's not in tune anymore, and that's kind of the draw of the instrument. Well, his idea, Joshua Stoddard, was to replace the bells in the church tower, summoning worshipers to church. And he put his calliope in the bell tower and played it. And the parishioners found the sound a little bit less than holy. Not very popular. But Joshua was an inventor and had done well for himself and donated to the church, and so they thought, well, we'll put up with it for a while and eventually it'll wear off. Well, the winter came, the harsh New England winter, and it burst the steam lines. And so they took the, what he called American Patented Steam Calliope out, or steam piano, out of the church bell tower, put it in his barn, and it was his brother, the captain of the steamboat Armenia on the Hudson River, that thought, hey, that thing carries a great distance. I could put that thing on my boat and use it to let people know I'm coming to town. And the idea took off like wildfire. And within a year, the Hudson River was the most musical stream in America because everybody had to have one. So how did it get out here on our rivers? Well, the showboat. The showboat used that as the Pied Piper to call people down to the river as well. Unfortunately, the timing, as you may have noticed, wasn't all that great because during the Civil War you really didn't want people to know what you were doing on the river, so the calliope was kind of useless for several years. But the first boat to carry one on the Ohio River was a packet boat. Now the packet boats, they were the workhorse of the river. They carried farm produce, freight, livestock, and passengers from town to town along the river. There was a boat named the Magnolia out of Cincinnati, Ohio that had one first. And 2 years later, when the Civil War broke out, would you believe? Now we're in the North, so I can say this. Because we were in the South, I can't tell the story quite this way. These guys come onto this packet boat and see these whistles. Now, all these whistles are is a hollow tube that resonates to make a sound. And they think, we can make bombs out of those. And the Southerners stole the calliope and made bombs out of it. We still won. I live in Jeffersonville. I'm on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line, so I can say that. Now, the calliope also brought some other things and ideas to the river. I'll tell you an interesting story. After the Civil War, there was a showboat going up the Kentucky River, headed towards the capital of the state of Kentucky. Which brings up a very unusual question that I think you all can help me with here. What's the name of the capital of Kentucky? Is it Louisville or Louisville?
Frankfurt.
My best joke got foiled already. Okay, so they're headed to Frankfurt on the Kentucky River. I do those things to make sure you're still paying attention. There is no test, by the way, so don't worry about that. Well, they're headed up the river there, and the calliope player goes out on the roof and starts to play Old Them Golden Slippers, which was a very popular tune in the 1880s. And while he's playing it, there's some people up on the bluffs looking down. Fur trappers. Young man and his son are looking down there at that, and they have no idea what this is. First of all, they've never heard the tune, so they didn't know what that was. And they saw this steam coming out, and they had no idea what that was, and it was really loud. So, of course, what's the natural response? They shot at the thing. Now, this story comes from a book called Showboats by Philip Graham. Published in 1951, University of Texas Press, and it's a very good book if you want to learn more about showboats after this talk. So they shoot at it, and they see the boat go up and land in town, so they run down there so they can tell the captain, hey, I saved that man. Saved him? Well, yeah, he was wrangling with that animal, and it was spitting and screaming and carrying on. So the captain said, I know, let's make good out of this. Why don't you come down? He didn't kill the calliope player, by the way. I forgot to put that part in there. Didn't kill the calliope player, but he said, why don't you come down tonight and see our show? You know, this way you can go up into the hills and tell people about our show and come down and see it the next night. And, okay, that wasn't supposed to happen, but I know how to fix it. I'm supposed to advance to the next slide. Okay, here you go. We got to go to the next slide. This would not be a presentation if there wasn't a mistake.
Yes.
Now, what were the shows? What were they coming to see? They were coming to see a melodrama. That's what everybody called them on the river. Now, a melodrama was a very interesting type of show to people in these days that didn't require as much as we do technologically to enjoy a presentation. Basically, it had two central characters, a heroine and a villain. Now, when the heroine came on stage, everybody cheered, yay! And when the villain came on stage, they booed. This was the natural reaction to live theater for people who weren't as cultured as you and I. So that's what these shows were. Now imagine we've got our fur trappers in the front row, and the heroine comes out, and then the villain comes to spirit her away to something that is evil, and all of a sudden everybody goes, boo! He got up with his gun and said, unhand her. That's really a true story of what happened aboard a showboat. So not only were they bringing entertainment to the rivers, but they were bringing something else, an education as to what theater would be. Remember, as we were settling the new lands of the growing United States out west, we didn't have the advantage of education that we do today, so a lot of people took things for face value. For instance, that instrument I was talking about on the roof of the boat, the calliope. How many of you have ever heard calliope? Calliope, yes. Calliope was actually more common in the circus than calliope. Why? Because when the circus first saw the instrument, this was in Maysville, Kentucky in 1870, P.T. Barnum, Phineas T. Barnum, first saw one of the things on the boat and thought this would be the perfect thing to put at the end of the circus parade to get people to follow to the big top for the show. So he got one, but he didn't like the name American Patented Steam Calliope, so he got out his book of Greek mythology and found that Calliope was a Greek muse known for her beauty and eloquence of voice, which in this case proves there's nothing in the name. And he put it in big gold letters on the side of the circus wagon, C-A-L-L-I-O-P-E. And as people looked at it, remember, we didn't have the education that we do today. So they sounded it out phonetically and came up with calliope. So both stuck. Now, I will tell you, if you go to look this up in the dictionary, you will find out that both are in every dictionary. And both are wrong. Why? Because it's a Greek word. They pronounce it calliope. So we're all wrong. So if you say calliope or calliope, either way is perfectly fine. So now back to our showboat, the melodrama. This was the type of play that you had, and they were very popular. some of us were talking before this presentation, and we were talking about the current rage in purported entertainment on television, you know, where they set up these situations and then watch people fight their way out of it, and that's not very popular today, but that's kind of what a melodrama was, except it was scripted and planned out. So that's what they did on the showboat. Now, what was a showboat like inside? It was very plain. It was literally a theater on a raft. Here we're looking at the majestic showboat, which, by the way, folks, is the very last existing intact showboat in the world today.
And came to Newburgh.
Yes, it did. It most certainly did when IU had it.
Yeah, when IU Theater had it,
Yes, it most certainly did. This thing is starting to get hot. I'm going to take it out of my pocket and let it do its own thing over here. So, they were very plain inside because the focus was supposed to be up here on the stage. Now, she is still around. Right now, she is just north of Cincinnati, Ohio. She is at New Richmond, Ohio, and there is a plan in the works to move her to her ancestral home of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Why? Because there's a group in Point Pleasant that wants to restore her for next year is her 100th birthday. So she's still around, and we'll see other pictures of her as we go. Very plain. The idea was to focus on the stage, but they could get 1,000 people on the inside of this boat, and it was only 150 feet by 40 feet wide. So they were, as you can see, pretty well packed in here. They even had a little balcony, and they had box seats beside the stage. And obviously somebody didn't pay the extra fare, as you can see here, with the empty seats. After the show, the stage was pulled, and the boat moved to the next town. Now, when I say stage was pulled, a lot of people look at that thing that hangs off the front of a steamboat when they come into the landing, and they put it down on the ground for you to walk on and off, and they call it a gangplank. But in river parlance, we call it a stage. Why? It goes back to the showboat days. When they came in town, they would set the stage on the land, and the band would line up on the edge of the stage and play music as people came aboard to buy tickets. So it was a stage. So when you're on an excursion boat, you'll see a stage with people performing music, and you'll think that's a stage. No, the stage is out front. That's a bandstand. We have to confuse you with our terminology. And then you can be on the inside now that you know next time you're aboard a boat. Although in some boats today, they may not know that. So that's the story of the showboat. Now this picture is of the showboat Majestic, and I love this picture. I actually took this from the Mississippi Queen at the very last Tall Stacks event in 2006. Unbeknownst to me when I took this picture, the Harriet Bishop had been sold that day to B.B. Riverboats of Cincinnati and was renamed River Queen just a few days later. And then the Majestic would be sold some 10 years later and end up in New Richmond. But this made it look just like the old days with a boat with a paddle wheel behind the old showboat. And there she is up at the ice piers. That's what these are. Ice piers. On the upper Ohio, those are very common at every town, so when the river ice is over in the wintertime, well, it used to. Haven't had that in many, many years. I think it was 1978 was the last major ice we had on the Ohio River. But when it would ice over, boats would tie up behind them so that the ice would go across the pointed bow and it would break it so it wouldn't crush the boats. I'm sure if you go back through historic pictures, and I'm sure it happened here as well as it did everywhere else, you would have that happen. Boats would get crushed at your landing when the ice would start to break up. Not when the ice formed. You think that would crush it as it grows out? No. It says it broke up because it would come down with great force against the side of the boat and break the hull.
Cotton blossom?
Exactly. Yeah, ice took a lot of boats down. Actually, a lot of people ask, and I'll answer this question that might be coming up already. What was the number one thing that destroyed steamboats, showboats, and things on the river?
Fire.
Yes, ma'am. Not according to the insurance agency. Fire is not the answer. It's correct, but it's not the answer. If you look at pictures of old steamboats before the 20th century, you will see on the top decks of the boats, they will have these racks with buckets in them. They're fire buckets. They would have a round bottom, so you wouldn't take them to your room because a lot of those boats didn't have hot and cold running water in your stateroom. And they would have them up there on the deck in the case of fire. Were they to put the fire out? No. They were also on the lower decks. The idea was fill the hull up with water and sink the boat. Why? Because insurance companies knew those boats were made out of anything you could get, and it was generally a fire trap. I know I shouldn't say that, but in modern days we have a whole lot of safety things we didn't back then. So if they sank it, they could get insurance money.